Welcome, Who You Listen To Podcast listeners, and this is your main man, Markey B, and right back at you at another episode on Who You Listen To Podcast, as I said, with Markey B. And we have a great guest with us. His name is Mr. Anthony Berryhill. Let's give him a big round of applause and welcome to the podcast. Welcome, Mr.
Thank
Berryhill.
you. Happy to be here.
Hey, I'm glad to have you. And let's just go ahead and dive straight in.
Sure.
Mr. Anthony Berryhill, tell us about yourself. Who is Mr. Berryhill?
Deep question. So what I am is I'm an educational consultant and coach. It's a long story that I'm sure I'll get into in just a moment. But what I do on a day-to-day basis is I'm kind of like an educational guru.
Yeah.
I've worked in corporate America trying to help companies being actually inclusive and help people of all backgrounds get promotions and jobs, be treated well in the workplace. And that's been my career for about 11 years. Been a former academic where I wrote about inclusion and intersectionality, people who actually did that work and tried to use that to solve really hard social problems like, living in the inner city, being under Hurricane Katrina, and often just people being treated like crap in schools and learning environments. And I would say I call myself a hacker. My company's called Elite College Hacker, which I'm sure we'll talk about, because my whole life has been about hacking systems and getting where I need to go. So my career and what I do is I help people hack their own systems, be it schools, classrooms, companies, whatever I need to do to get them where they need to go.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, let's just start with this. I have to get this out of the way. You were named in 2018 the America's Greatest Thinker in 2018.
Yeah.
So, bravo to you.
Appreciate it.
That's a very great accomplishment.
Yeah.
And I remember it was a quote that I was reading that you said. Do you remember the quote that you shared at that moment about success?
Yeah, I said that on my art. So this was the Greatest American Thinker was a contest. It was a public debate contest. So think presidential debates, but not as much of a hot mess as they are now. But it was set up presidential debates where there were two podiums and there was a philosophical question. And this was a contest that used to be on C-SPAN, so it was a big deal. The question was failure or success. Which shapes a person's life more? And I represented the failure side. And I don't know if it's the exact quote, but the thesis was, and it was based on a lot of my personal experience too, was that to be ultimately successful, meaning to do what we think is important, that makes us proud, we have to rely on failure to push us in certain directions or push us away from certain directions. So the argument that won that debate was, in the two rounds we had, was that we want to be successful all the time. We don't want to lose, but it's the losing that makes us make the best decisions. And that it's the illusion of always being successful that makes us do really dumb things.
Wow. I love that statement you said, it's the losing that makes us successful.
Yeah.
Now, let's just rewind a little bit. Let's go back to young Anthony Berryhill. Like, who was this young man that's to become the greatest thinker, right? Like, what's the story? Share with the audience.
Yeah, I guess I'll start the story when I was about 5. And I lived in lower Ninth Ward, New Orleans, which is was before Katrina, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods you had. Like, it was not unusual, and it was all African American, so it was not unusual for brothers and sisters to be killed every day. It was on the news all the time. The educational schools, the elementary school and the high school were even worse. Numerous amounts of sexual abuse, physical abuse. And if you were known as the smart kid, as I was, IQ tested, you had a life of hell. And I had a rough family life and all those things because, even the way I talk right now, right? I was talking like this when I was 6 years old because I was a super nerd, reading books. I'm like, I gotta get out of the hood. And I'm short, I'm overweight, I have no athletic ability, no music ability. I can only get out through books. So even as a young kid, I was that kid who was getting beaten up every day and all this other stuff. So I had to figure out really early that if I'm gonna get out, I gotta think my way through this. Right? I gotta keep my grades up. I can't get in a fight. I can't defend myself. I can't get suspended because I knew even at that early age, seeing other young African American males, that was the track that got them to that prison school to prison pipeline. So that was me, and then a program that's called Summer Bridge, now called the Breakthrough Collaborative. They find students like myself, and they still do some God-saving work. They find kids in these kind of environments and say, hey, we're going to give you a supportive network, we're going to give you some summer courses to get up to grade level, and then we'll pull you out of those schools so that you can be in a more supportive environment. So for me, I went to a school called Isidore Newman, which is actually where the Manning brothers, hardest school in the state. And that's kind of where that hacking started coming in, because I had to figure out on my own before we had Google, right? Like, all right, I'm in a class full of all white people, and they're speaking a new language with tests that are nothing, that you can't memorize your way through. How do you get through that? And the way I got through it just by reading everything I had. Like, how do I speed read? How do I translate what they're saying on these tests? So I came with a lot of those strategies for my own researching, based on this desperation to get out. And then so I did that. I went to there for middle school and then high school. And then I had this point where it's like, how the hell do I tell a college a life that I don't even understand how to explain it? Where one day, a good way to put it was my average day as a teenager was I would get up at 5 a.m., take 3 buses to get to the school because the inner city and the Garden District in New Orleans are really far away. Yeah.
I was tracking with you.
It was rough. And then I would be at school until 4, and then I did debate as a student. That began the whole debating greatest thinker thing. And then I would come home by 6, and then I'm taking like calculus and the hardest history classes, hardest science classes. So I had to figure out a way to hustle my own way, try to translate those things and come up with the strategies. And because I was a debater, I was flying across the country in these national tournaments. What I started doing was connecting those dots. I.e., if I'm debating a kid who's from a blue ribbon school in New York City, like Stuyvesant or something, I gotta outthink them, because I'm not gonna win based on my presence or my body or what I look like. I gotta argue them with a person who doesn't look like me judging. Sometimes in a room full of a lot of people who don't look like me. And through all of that, there's a long period of my college life, but I won't go into all of it. I eventually gained that kind of confidence from a super shy, kind of traumatized kid from that background to, all right, I know how to defend myself verbally. I know how to argue in an essay, or how to write it out, or how to explain really difficult things to people. And in terms of the greatest American thinker, that was about, when I was doing that, it was like an essay contest. And then if you had the top 2 essays defending one position, they flew you down to have that competition. So it all kind of fit together because I kind of made it all fit together. From young Anthony, who's being terrorized at home, my parents were like, why the hell do you do debate? You're not street smart, you're book smart, all that kind of nonsense, to kind of transforming that into like a way to not just get myself out, but also I've started seeing how that connects to women who are in STEM being treated like garbage by their math teachers, or people who are sexual minorities who are told they don't belong. I saw a lot of those connections, and in my life, I've been able to kind of transform that trauma into being able to tell people, I hear you, and here's how you get out of it.
That's why I think about people who are the most successful people. Mm-hmm. They find a way to take something that may look bad and find the beauty in it.
Yeah.
I still remember I was reading this book from Kevin Hart, I Can't Make This Up. And one thing I loved about reading it and also listening to it on Audible was that he was talking about these devastating stories, and he will find the beauty in the message in it. And I liked how you said you had to think your way out.
Yeah.
So it made you look at your story in so many different ways and find the beauty in it. Yeah. So how did that start? Did that start at a young age where you found the beauty in your story, or like even in the atmosphere you grew up in? Like, where did that start?
Well, it started with failure. I was considered, my mom has apologized, so she gets it. But I was told I was a failure because I wasn't street smart. I didn't fit all those stereotypes, this was the whole neighborhood. It's unfortunately too much of our culture. when you're told you're automatically a failure because of who you are and because you're doing things you're supposed to do, you've got to either abandon ship, like unfortunately many children do. But I knew abandoning that and means I'm not getting out. It means I'm another statistic. So the first part was just like survival mode. And then after that, it's like, once I was in that other school, I was able to spend some time and think, okay, what is happening? And I thought about it like an academic, like a student. It's like, what is happening here? What are the terms? Like, who's writing about this? So I started seeing it not just of myself, but larger systems that we're now starting to talk about. When you talk about inclusion and people who are serious about inclusion. So it started about being seen as a social failure, and even in many cases, a failure as an African-American Black boy or Black man. And then I realized it's not my failure, but there are deeper sins that are happening. So that was the first step. And I think in terms of the beauty of it, it's recognizing that just because I fail in one environment or one culture or one group of people does not mean that every culture sees it that way. So when I started getting exposed to more different types of people, learning like academic literatures and studying actually history, I started realizing, okay, there's not just one world, there are many worlds where we can belong. And that's where I started seeing the beauty of it.
You know, it's interesting when I heard you say, just because I failed, what made me think about too is maybe it wasn't that you failed, it was maybe that they had a failed perspective.
Correct.
And sometimes that is very damaging as well too, is failed perspectives now that we carry on and that we believe that we are a failure.
Yeah.
Because I think about, especially also on this platform as well, is to those who are young people, for those who are find themselves in that situation, what is your message to them?
Yeah, I think the first, and this took me decades to learn, but the first one is pay very close attention to who you consider as your audience. And sometimes I'll point my finger, and that's why I don't blame my mom per se, because she was reacting to a culture where that thinking makes sense, right? That's one of the dangers of inner city neighborhoods that are highly segregated, is that you do need to be street smart to survive. The problem comes when you're in a much more complex world, or you're trying to transition into getting yourself out of poverty. And again, it's not just one person, it's the whole system. I would often, my teacher, like the reason, like my mom was great, my teachers were in this public school system pretty damn evil. They would beating kids for things like, you don't talk enough, I'm gonna beat you with a stick. If you talk too much, you're gonna beat you. And these are African American female teachers. So it's a systematic problem. So what I tell students, and again, I have to get the students when they're pretty traumatized, like from all backgrounds, rich or white does not matter. I tell them, look, you should see this education system as a game. And the teacher that tells you you don't belong in the math class because you're female, they're a boss. They don't know what they're talking about. It's being able to see beyond those failed perspectives. And also what I've noticed more in this society is you're rewarded for having that self-awareness and having that kind of bravery in ways that people are now starting to realize more often. So everyone wants to, for example, everyone wants to stand out in the college admissions process, but they don't want to go through the hell of actually taking that risk. But you're not getting into Harvard or Stanford if you don't. And you're not getting those $100,000 jobs if you don't either, because no one wants someone who just kind of were just the next bully or the next conformist or the next person to be a stereotype.
I love that it goes back to Dreamers. I know we have the different Dreamers Act and all those things. I won't dive too deep into that, but I like how you said see beyond. Yeah. So it was this one speaker who was talking about, based off of where he grew up at, he loved books because in books he could see other different great pictures and imagine him one day being in that picture. It allowed him to see beyond. Was that for you as well? Like being able to see books as well? Yeah, and it wasn't just books. See, I always laugh when people say, what's wrong with guys today is that they play video games. When I hear that, I look at the person like, you're an idiot. And I hold by that. Because I think I'll give you 2 points. One is, video games were one of the ways that I was able to see beyond.
Like when I was a little kid and I'm tired of getting beaten down and beaten at home for not being street smart or whatever, I was playing Ninja Gaiden. I was playing these video games that taught me vocabulary, that taught me resilience. Like, and I'm not talking like Halo where you die, you respawn. You die and you go all the way to the beginning of the game, and having that kind of ethic was a good analogy. It was an analogy to going through the New Orleans public school system, where every day you're getting beaten, literally, for doing the right thing. Video games allowed my brain to go somewhere else, be it a sci-fi world or an alien, it doesn't matter. It was my way of escaping, and I think it's that way for a lot of people too. The second part, where it comes to college admissions, is I'm the first one to go down a parent's throat if they say, my kid plays video games, I'm gonna try to make him stop, and I literally yell at them. I'm like, don't you dare. Like, you don't know what's going on. You know your kid could get a scholarship from that. So the kids start smiling, I'm like, I'm not BSing. Like, there's a reason the Army's trying to hire gamers. They literally are. There's a reason that finance companies are trying to too, because the ability to see in worlds that are not yours and to have that resilience and fight is very rare to find. So for me, it was not just books, but it was also video games.
It's very interesting because you think about parenthood.
Yeah.
I know I'm a father.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, my daughter's not there yet in regards to, not even video games, but even to pick up a controller, even though she may try if she sees something, but don't know if it's a controller. But point being is, for parents out there that's even listening, that's a different perspective. And that's why I love about who you're listening to, because now individuals get to listen to you and get a different perspective of maybe even their child playing video games. Because it has been frowned upon. Let's be honest. And regardless of whatever culture, some cultures, it is definitely frowned upon. Video games, and for you to say that it helped you in life as well, that's powerful, man.
It helps a lot of people get into big schools.
Wow.
No joke.
Explain more.
I'll give an example I'll hide some information, but it was a student who had a relatively low GPA and not much else going on. And after I'm like, this person has spent 3 years doing something, because it's not his grades, and it's not the SAT, and I, use my cross-examination skills from being a debater. An hour and a half, I'm just like, you're not going to BS me. And he's like, I'm a pro-am Fortnite player, and he's ESL, he's English as a second language, and I'm thinking, dude, why didn't you say that an hour and a half ago? And that was the essay. It's like, because they learned English in part through Fortnite. They learned how to engage with other people and form collectives and such. And I'm like, it's not the Fortnite, it's what that represents, right? And I think what happens, and it happened in my family, culturally too, as a black boy, black man, we're so focused on appearance and performing and serving a role, but we're not thinking about the root of those things, right? And often it's that second part is what everyone's looking for. It's a real authentic, it's not what you do, it's how you do it and why you do it. So if you're playing video games and you're just not showering and you're not doing anything else in life and you're not even dedicating yourself to the game, that's no points. But if there's an intention behind it, if you're approaching professional level, if you're learning things from it, if you're finding your community through it, like we all had to through COVID, that's a different conversation, but most people kind of hide behind their corners and hide behind social politics and all this other nonsense. And so they don't really see what's really important.
Or get a chance to hear somebody like yourself speak that. And going back to what, why, and how, and like it driving what you do.
Yeah.
How has it drove what you do?
Yeah, it drove me to first, I didn't say this, but I went to Stanford for undergrad, Yale for grad school. And it drove me to study what the hell is happening, right? Like, particularly with focus on African-American politics, I did it from like a problem-solving perspective. So in terms of why are people residentially segregated? Why, as Kanye West said, before he turned kind of a little nuts, why does George Bush not really care about black people? And I studied that doing a dissertation on it, because I was wanting to know, how do I understand myself? Like, where does this come from? Why are these systematic problems? why do most African American males that I've known in my life and my families and my friends, why do they all end up having the same outcomes? And I figured that out. Partly about some things I've told you. And then I switched to, okay, how do I help the people who can be helped? It's almost like I turned myself into Break the Collaborative, but on a smaller scale. Like, I can help these people figure out what their schools are not telling them about how to apply to college. Or, when I was in high school, I was tutoring the other outreach students. It's like, all right, I survived this Caucasian woman who's really harder than the AP exam. I can reverse engineer that to teach another person in geometry, algebra 1, how I figured it out faster than I did. So it gave me that sense of not just giving back, but cracking that code or hacking that code, because, I guess, hot take, right? Like, I don't think most educational, unlike my high school and middle school, I don't think most educational environments really try to really help students kind of move up socially or economically. And I consider myself the person to disrupt or hack that.
Right. And I mean, it's critical that you found your place and almost found your purpose as well. Yeah. Because what is damaging to a lot of different things, especially in the school systems that I found, is the system.
Yes.
It's the system, and that gets in the way. It's not usually the kids, it's the system. So when we kind of get out the way, it can be a better system in place. And so going with that, what have you found with the work that you started to do that are critical areas that you try to address with the students you work with? And if you can tell us more about the program.
I'll answer that and then I'll talk about the program. So the first thing is, I think it's all about authenticity, like being raw on it. So when I work with a student, like the first thing I usually have to do is delete all the things they've been told about themselves. And that's if you're Asian American, white, does not matter. And what I often see is that students will come to me and they'll have these roles and these cliches that they've been told, like I'm a leader, or I'm supposed to be obedient, or I'm supposed to be love math and science. And then I'm like, that won't get you in. That'll get you rejected with a 4 pronoun. Right? So I have to, it's sort of like therapy. It's like I gotta subtract some of that stuff. And sometimes I'll even say, your parents are not allowed to be on call. Because sometimes it's the parents that have given them that training in that program. Or more likely, the schools. So that's it. And what I've noticed is, especially in 2023, the more honest you are, the more that people should, not only do they trust you, but they should trust you. Whereas when people are trying to put on a facade, like I'm black enough, or I'm this kind of guy, I get all the ladies, that's scary if you're someone in a position where you're trying to create a community or a school, because that's how you get all kinds of nasty stuff that can happen. So that's authenticity and honesty. The second thing I encourage people to do is pursue things they actually want to do, not what they think they should. So,
you didn't really say that again.
Yeah, pursuing things you want to do, not what things you think you should. Because what's happened, and it still happens, 90% of applicants, if you look at their essays, and I can tell, you know what, that's not you. Or, you can look at the large recommendation and look at the activity list, and the teachers, here's a hot take for everyone, teachers tell the truth. So when the kid's trying to act like they're a leader, and the teacher says this person, all they do is put their head down and get A's and don't care about anyone, that's a problem. And so sometimes students will say, it's affirmative action. No. It's like, no, I don't know who you are because you're stereotyping yourself as the obedient math and science child, or as the sports player who doesn't really care what they're doing because their mom made them. So I have actually told parents, like, your kid's dropping football because they don't want to do it. And if you get 1,000 essays, you can tell. You can tell when the parents write them. You can tell when the parents are. Here's the third thing I ban. I ban parents and students. Sometimes what they'll do is part of the conformity thing. They'll try to write an essay, and then they'll try to brag to everyone else about the process so they feel good about themselves. And I'm like, that's not allowed here, because admissions officers, I like to say admissions officers don't care if you're popular. And they don't care if your friends think you're doing it the right way. They care about outcomes. So when I'm working with a family, like the 2% that fail is because the parents and the child, they're more worried about their egos or about their friends than they are about Harvard's thinking they're worth it. Or they're more worried about that than getting a scholarship. But as I learned as a debater, it's about the judge. The judge is the admissions officer. It's not social programming, being cool, or checking off boxes because that's what you're supposed to do. And it's funny because I'm in meetings with admissions officers, and they all say the same thing. It's, we want to know who you are, and we can tell you're faking.
That's critical to jot down.
Yeah.
Somebody right now needs to jot that down family-wise, because this is critical information. I mean, sometimes it's not being told the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really honestly what you're saying is you're digging for the truth.
Yep.
It's not that you're trying to put on a persona, because I don't want anybody to hear that. Put on a persona of you being this
passionate
person or something that you're really not. You're really not. What you're digging for is the truth and saying, me being myself will always get me in the door.
Yeah. But
as you said, it's so many personas sometimes that you're trying to weed through and almost neglect, deflect, and that you're trying to get down to the truth. So if you could say that one more time, what you're saying, admission officer.
And then I'll go So I've been trained to think you're playing for the judge. You're playing for the win. You're not playing for what the audience thinks is cool. So it's being completely honest. Obviously within some limitations. Because I was trained as a Stanford interviewer. I don't do that because there's a conflict of interest now. But you're trained to feel when someone's being self-aware. That's criteria. You're trained for, I like to say, your maturity beyond your years, or a fully understanding of yourself. So that authenticity is everything. And very few people are willing to do it, and that's why very few people get it. The second thing, do what you want to do, not what you think you should do. And I will say this, we all already know this, right? Like, if you're at a bar and someone's trying to hit on you and they say things like, I'm hitting you because I want someone as pretty as you are, you'll be like, good the hell away, right? But that's what everyone does in their normal lives, and they all do it in the admissions process. And I will tell you, I've read thousands of essays, and college admissions officers have read tens of thousands. You can physically feel it when someone's being fake. And you can see it. People will use the same words, right? I can't tell you how many times a child has written, I have a passion for. And I remember a Stanford admissions officer saying, actually multiple admissions officers have said this on YouTube, they're like, what 17-year-old has a passion? So then you have the parents telling the child, write about passion, and then someone like me would say that, and I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about. It's just nothing but cliches. And then the poor admissions officer is like, oh no, not one of these again. And then once that admissions officer starts thinking, that you're pretty much one step away from a rejection when they have 20 other kids who have the same grades, who probably are a little more interesting and more honest. And the same thing goes with jobs. You're interviewing 100 people, they all try to act the same because that's the way they're supposed to do in order to look the part. It's easy to throw them all out of bed.
So really, authenticity is in.
It's everything.
Sometimes we fool ourselves that authenticity is not, and sometimes it's not even us. It's sometimes the communities we surround ourselves with.
Most of the time, it is.
So that's very critical. So going with that, what would you tell a student right now who's a junior and looking at potential colleges?
Sure.
What would your message be to them, and also maybe a parent as well?
Well, if I may, let me go through the years.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because what you do is different for each. Yeah. If you're an 8th grader, there's a trend, especially internationally, there people are trying to move the prep train earlier and earlier. For example, I don't work with people before 9th grade. That's a little crazy, no. But if you're in 8th grade or middle school, your job is to, if you're a parent or have a healthy kid who feels super supported, and make sure they have the academic muscles. Because we don't think like, make sure they know how to speed read. Make sure they know, oh my God, know how to type fast, touch typing. Make sure they know how to read clearly and they have the basic math skills. They need to be in good shape. We only think about being in shape physically, but we don't think about it academically. And that, if you don't have that walking in and the timer starts at 9th grade, you're in trouble. So that's step one. And I think that's all you need to do in middle school is be a healthy person, help them, support them in figuring out who they are and like just push them further in whatever that looks like. I'd say in 9th and 10th grades, your job is to get as high of a GPA as you really can. Like strategically pick classes. It's the same, and then start to spend some time digging into what that looks like, whether or not the school wants you to do it. Like whether or not there's a club, go create something, go do your own research, go play 100 of different kinds of sports. It doesn't matter how creative it is. It's that being generative and being willing to do things that other people don't do because you want to do it. Now, when we're in the business side of things, and you're in 11th grade, it's get the SAT done as fast as you can, get the highest score as you can. So you got to get the numbers, but after that, it's about more depth. So depth of really drilling down. So I always tell people, don't be well-rounded. Go, because like there's actually a criterion for this. Go deeper. So it's like, there's no debate club, make one. There's no one cares about anime at your school. Go find 5 people and spend every week watching and create that community yourself. People think you're a nerd because you like jazz. Do more of it. That becomes an essay. That's a really good one. That was a student who got into a top 20 school on that essay. That's what you got to do your junior year is really make yourself an expert at whatever it is. And ideally start sharing it if you can, or finding other people, or if you can't do that, write, and act like you're a future PhD. I gotta call it the future PhD. Act like be like, if you're into math and science and you're talking about artificial intelligence, right? Be the hyper nerd at that, where you can tell me the difference between artificial general intelligence versus regular AI. And then, because that all then feeds into the senior year, because I can tell you, the essays that colleges demand right now are probing for that kind of information. They're hard. And I think the subpoint to that, through all these years, is I would also encourage students to treat college like a subject. Like, know what the difference is between a liberal arts college and a public college. Know what the social cultures are like. Know if a certain school is a kind of you can't ever get a date. Be able to imagine a plan. If you're going to say, I want to go to this school, go through the website and go through the YouTube, go through the day in the lives. And I make my kids do this. Treat it like a subject that you're doing at a serious level. Because if you're working with me and we're in the essays and you're writing why Princeton, they're not going to take you're a great school with the best people in networking. That's throw it away. They want to hear, I know about this group and this club and it relates to this thing in my story that I did this time and this is what I see myself doing and then I can look across the transcript and the letter of recommendation, and then I'm giving an admissions officer who's scared as hell that someone's faking and going to be the next person on the news or going to be a dropout. Then we're giving them real evidence so that when they go to a committee and try to get you in, it kind of plants 11 other people at a table. You've given them the weapons to do that. So the college preparation process is not check the boxes. It's the opposite of that. It's intentionally being more of yourself, proving it with evidence. And then when we work on the applications, then it's like, let's give the clearest signal to the admissions officer what the real thing is. And that I know what I'm asking for when I say I want to go to Harvard, and not just another kid who thinks their parents are going to think they're awesome. And then if I'm Harvard, then it's like, it's no different than any other human being. It's like, if I know who you really are, I can trust you. Same thing with colleges.
Man, that's a mouthful.
It's a lot.
That was really great information. And with that being said, what I loved about what you talked about is, you never even said cost.
Cost, no.
Because I think sometimes what we can get lost in is cost. Or even what we don't have as well. When you think about even your story, you said you thought your way out. So you found your way out, even in your circumstances. So what are those tools that say a student who's saying, you know what, I'm carrying my family right now, I'm probably the first to even go to college. Like what would your message be to them, or to an individual who mom is just struggling and trying to find a way, trying to push the children to college and stuff? Like, what can I give them, really? I mean, as you know, with these admission essays and stuff, is to even apply to some of these schools, it is not cheap. However, what are some tools and things that they can use that are inexpensive?
Well, the first precondition is you have to know what you want and why you want it.
I like that.
There's, and you have to do self-help first. So sometimes with African American students, it breaks my heart sometimes because they'll kind of follow the crowd and do what people are telling them, and they'll walk in with a 3.2 or 2.7, and they're thinking Ivy, and I'm like, nah. I mean, that's not gonna cut. Like, you gotta be diligent in your schoolwork. You gotta handle business on that stuff. And sometimes in our culture, we have a culture against that. And I see it. It's like you gotta step up to the plate with what you can do. But let's put that aside for a moment. It's part of it's like you gotta treat it like a game you're trying to learn. So if you for the most fancy schools, if you're bringing the heat and you have the resume and you're doing everything you can and you clearly tell your story that you're helping your family, they love that stuff. People think it's affirmative action. That does not exist. It's because corporations think the same way. It's like, oh, you got your butt kicked by life and you were poor and you were treated like crap for doing the right thing. We know that if we put you on this campus, you're going to handle organic chem. So what they'll often do is give preferential aid, meaning they'll throw full rides. When a student comes, not only do those situations ensure help you get in, if you come with the right stats and the right real resume, you do all this work, they will fight over backwards to get you. In my case, when it wasn't that supportive, what I did was I know I can write. I did a lot of writing contests and essay contests, and won a few of them. That gave me some more money, and then I ended up getting a lot of the best packages they had. So I had no idea how I would have afforded it, but you gotta really put the line out there. And if you're doing your part and you have that file that you've worked on, you bust your butt and you're being a good person, what I've started to notice my whole life is opportunities will start finding you. People will start finding you, and you don't even know it's happening. I'll give an example. In my high school, I wrote a very dramatic essay that was talking about the violence I endured as a kid, and living in both the inner city but also going to a predominantly white school, and the danger of that. And my college counselor called me to his office. I'm like, I've never been called to the principal's office. What the hell's going on? He's like, yeah, a certain university called me to see if that essay was accurate. And I said that it was completely accurate. And he's like, yeah, the whole admissions committee cried. I think you're getting in. And by the way, another school called me yesterday, and they told me the same thing. And I'm like, I didn't even know. I'm just telling the story. This is effed up. This is how it is. This is how I see it. And that's one of the things I will tell people is do your part first. If you have to piss off your parents, piss them off. If you piss off your friends, does not matter. Do your thing and do it well and do it with integrity and have good character. And then be open to opportunities. That's number one. Number two, ask for help. Doesn't have to be me. There's YouTube. My God, YouTube. I wish it existed. Right? So if you're that person who has no idea how to apply to college, you should spend 20 hours being like, okay, I want to get into Stanford. There's so many people, including of color, who give their real experiences because they have the same view as I have. So people nowadays have a beautiful thing that I never had, which is they have people giving the real intelligence on this stuff. And you can cite that as evidence in essays. So people are telling how it is. It's just one thing I noticed is that people will say no to themselves and they won't even make that step to figure out, how could I afford college? There's thousands of videos on that. So if you can find people who are willing to help you and you're asking and you're reaching out and you're doing your own research, that combination, you can start getting it. I mean, we could talk about like hardcore details, but that combination of effort and hustle not only gets you into college, but it also, you will end up finding opportunities to get the money that you probably don't even know exist.
I mean, and to add on to what you just said was talking about my own experience is going back to the opportunity and honesty. I mean, the school I ended up going to, shout out to Taylor University, I didn't even imagine I would go to the university. It was kind of, I won't even say last minute, it was just an experience where my mom said, well, let's give this school a shot. And it was not even on my list. No hard feelings, Taylor University. It wasn't on my list. And I went there, and I tell students all the time is, don't look at who's there, look at what is there and what could this campus provide.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Because then you're looking at it from an open perspective. And when I looked at it in an open perspective, it provided me with a lot of different things that even correlated with my beliefs as well. And I got a chance to talk to one, he wasn't a missions person, but he was high ranked at the school. And what he looked at was, what was my number in my class? That's not talked about enough is too, they look at your class rank. I mean, like they look at your class rank. And at the end of the day, he said the number, and then he asked me a couple of things by myself, and I had to be honest with him. And the truth got me in the school. Beyond just the football abilities, and I had football abilities and track, all those different other things, even singing, it was my honesty. And right in front of my mom, and that could be a vulnerable experience, I was honest. And all it requires, as Mr. Berryhill said, is just you to be yourself. My story wasn't a struggle story per se, but it was a story of faith and love and legacy. So if that's your story, share that story. But it goes back to even previous episodes. What I've been mentioning is you have to own your story. You have to value your story. See the meaning in your story. See the purpose of your story. And even now, if you take some moments, I know you're young, for those who are listening to this podcast are young, jot down one thing about your story. It can be something that you don't even like. Jot down it. And keep on reflecting. I guarantee you'll find the beauty in it.
Oh, I've seen that applying for jobs that would pay a lot of money. I mean, there's money, like, if you're in a really effed up situation economically or socially, and like you do your part and like you handle your business academically, you can get paid a lot of money very young. And I mean, I've applied to places like McKinsey, gotten really far, and worked at PIMCO. They pay a lot of money. They're a great company. And the thing I consistently heard was, you have a great story. In those words. And the more elite the institution nowadays, the more they're tuned to what is your story. That's been sometimes the first interview question. Because they're like, if you talk to any CEO, and I've had to, my jobs, it's like, they don't want to hear, I'm a team player, I'm a leader, I'm passionate, I think I'm awesome, and here's my role. They don't want to hear that because that scares the hell out of them. Right? No elite institution wants to hear that. They want to hear, who are you really? Because who you are really is what I have to hire. And that's, like if you're working in investment banking, for example, I worked in finance for like 11 years. What they want to know is, who are you really when we're putting a $2 million deal on your head? And you're talking to this client that really matters to our company, or you're Harvard and you're putting some child in a dorm full of 200 vulnerable people. I don't want to know who you're faking to be. I want to know who you really are and what your story is, because I have nothing else that matters, right? So what you just said was gold, because that's where all of the high-paying elite institutions are. And not just elite, like just in general. If I don't know your story, I don't know who you are. And if I don't know who you are, you could be the XX murderer, you could be the person who terrorizes animals. Like, I wish I was kidding. But this is real stuff that colleges and companies are dealing with right now. And that's why, like, if you look at Stanford admissions and you see people who get in, they'll use the same words. I got in because I have certain points of excellence, non-cognitive stress. I have self-awareness. I have the ability to overcome adversity. I have the ability to refuse people who are being abusive. I'm the person who helps someone with bullying. I'm the person who, everyone said I was stupid for studying about, AI, but I did it anyway. Like, they love that stuff. So your story is the most important thing. And if you want to become a doctor,
yeah.
They're all saying the same line. I mean, any place that has law and medicine or the job you want that pays $100K, if you don't get that story right and you don't have it or you don't allow your health to have it, you're actually shutting the door on yourself.
So with that in mind, too, moving on forward is with so much information accessible, because as we talked about, we have YouTube, has it crippled our ability to think critically? What can we do right now to strengthen our students' critical thinking skills, and why is it important?
How long do you have? It's yes and no.
Okay.
The no is it's hard to critically think if you don't have exposure to thought. And there were a lot of things that I wish I was exposed to or could have read, but we didn't have Google. We had to go to the library, and libraries, they're great, but you're limited to what you have. So there's more information. Now the problem is that people are not being taught, or sometimes cases not being allowed to evaluate the quality of the information they're being given. So they're going on, about to have my last debate student at nationals, last ever. And what I'm starting to see even with national circuit championship debaters is they'll just copy a file of stuff that they don't understand, that they haven't really processed, and they'll say, this is my argument, and when I judge, I'm in horror. So even people who are very research intensive, this is happening. And so I think most of the time, adults and teachers, or even debate coaches, are not doing their job to give the context and make sure people are being good academics, and making sure they see both sides of an issue, and making sure they understand that, what Fox News says should be read differently from what MSNBC says, and should be read differently from some scholar. You have to evaluate your sources. Kind of like I said, evaluate your audience, same thing. But it's becoming too easy to commoditize and just shut your brain off because that's what everyone wants to do. That is a real danger. And I guess I will tell you from a college admissions perspective, that can get you thrown out fast. Like, if you say, I want to be banker, guess what the school's going to do? They're going to give you an interview with an investment banker who knows what you're talking about and will say if you know what you're talking about. So I guess my advice to those in the audience is, when you read anything, don't shut your brain off. Even if your parents tell you something, don't shut your brain off. Like, your job is to think about what's going on, because you're responsible for your ideas and your behaviors and your attitudes and what you write down or what you present. Every time you submit a paper, if it's plagiarized from some source you didn't evaluate or you didn't check, guess what? No one cares. Suspension. In a debate tournament, that happens, you may be disqualified from the national tournament, from a tournament. And I think that's right. So I would say, people are not encouraging or teaching critical thinking skills, but make sure you learn them because it's your butt on the line. I will say at Yale, I was a head TA for one of the biggest classes. They had called Moral Foundations of Politics. And we would catch students trying to copy from some, I'm not going to name companies, but some kind of online source of papers, and they'll just copy verbatim or paraphrase it, and we're like, F.
Yeah.
It's not, you can't say, I got it from some source that was, no. So I would say, you have to take ownership over what you're presenting as your ideas or what your analysis is, and you got to make sure that the information you get is correct. And And I think that's going to be more and more important in a world where, I'll tell you, I've started using ChatGPT. I've caught it make-up quotes. And I will check the sources, and I'm like, that source does not exist. That happened to me yesterday, trying to prepare my student for the national debate tournament. And that reminded me, it's like, yeah, it's an awesome tool, you should use it, but you can't shut your brain off.
See, and you dive right into what I'm going into next, man.
Mm-hmm.
Even before we even start this podcast, I'm hearing it, and I tell you, I won't call myself a novice. I'm still learning more about it, I will say is, but this AI, what is AI? What is this AI?
That's the billion-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. Honestly, in its current form, AI is just, I would call it Google on steroids. Because Google's been doing AI-like things for decades.
Explain.
Yeah, well, there was a bunch of Stanford undergrads who did linear algebra, did like their math, their linear algebra and multivariable calculus class, and were like, I'm not gonna get into math, but we could use this idea to create a search engine. Hello, Google. All it is, it's software that simulates learning based on information it gets, and based on patterns it sees. It's a facsimile or like a metaphor for how we normally learn, but it doesn't have the emotional understanding, the kind of the critical thinking that we have, but it simulates it. It looks like it because people are cramming in bunches and bunches of algorithms and code and like billions of pages of literature. So then it recognizes patterns and then tell us things that we think make sense. The problem is it's garbage in, garbage out. So it picks up everything, including all the crap, right? And sometimes the AI will make things up because it thinks that's the right answer. Whereas our job as human beings is to check sources, is to know where this comes from, is to know the context of where it comes from. Like, put it bluntly, like, I'm not scared of AI because there's so much that it can't do in terms of understanding context and social things and norms and literatures and all those other things. And I think AI is something that it's a beautiful tool. I love it because here's the positive side. I think it destroys a lot of the things that I consider bad practices. For example, when I was in the elementary school system, they would give us book reports. Educational garbage, right? You can't give a book report anymore. You can't just give a memorization test as easily because it's never been important to do that nonsense, right? And now you have a tool that pretty much can say in 5 seconds, okay, Catcher in the Rye, what's in it? Right, so now, we're not there yet, but it's caused enough of a ruckus that those in education have to now say, oh, it's not just about just regurgitating information because that's lazy teaching and lazy test writing. We have to test your ability to be critical thinkers. We have to test your ability to understand information, be information literate. That's where we're gonna be pushed.
So you think it's gonna push us, because that was going into, with the new AI-backed technologies such as, I know you mentioned chat and GPT, do you foresee this shifting the landscape of education, especially as it pertains to those critical thinking skills we just discussed? And it seems like you're on the line as it's enhancing it in a sense.
I'm cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
There will be resistance, and there already is. Like, ironically, on the university they're doing AI detectors that are wrong at detecting AI.
Of course.
So I think, honestly, what was most more disruptive was not AI. It was more like things like YouTube and the democratization of information. It's more the fact that I could go, I would say Google itself, its existence, is much more destructive in terms of kind of those, like in this regard, not destructive, but disruptive. Because if I give you Google, and you're someone who was in my position, and your parents tell you that no one in your family left the state, and like, Stanford, what's that? 10 Google hits, I can find 200, 300 pages of people telling me the truth about what's going on, how to get in, what are the resources, how do you, you can read your way through it. You couldn't do that in 1998 as easily. I did it with a little bit I had in my own kind of guile and my network of debaters and people I knew. But now, it doesn't matter what people around you say. You can get that information if you're smart and hustle and things like that. So to me, AI is just a much more efficient way of doing that. But like Google, like if you are brain dead at the wheel with Google, you'll get yourself in trouble pretty quick, just like you will with ChatGPT. So I think both require critical thinking skills. I think the difference with Google versus AI is that AI super speeds up the ability to create content and writing. So it's not just about just doing hard work, it's about knowing what work to do. And I think with AI, I think the people who will succeed, because if you do AI right, doing AI right means you have to have critical thinking skills actually. Because if you just say, write my paper, that doesn't mean you even pass. Like good teachers will write assignments that will slaughter you for that. Like for example, when I taught the 300-person class at Yale, we wrote test questions that were way harder than just what's the social contract. Because you had to actually know that was the D-level answer. Now we're going to write a question that requires you to connect that to things that are not Googleable. Requires you to come up with your own thesis. Like, so we're testing, can you write a thesis statement? Can you synthesize information? So if teachers are good and schools are good, there's language for this, like Bloom's taxonomy and all this other stuff, that you will start pushing up the level of understanding. I'll give an example of this. So there are major exams like the GMAT, and even in nursing, called the NCLEX, where they don't just ask you, what is this thing? They'll say, here's the scenario with a whole bunch of information. What's the right result? Or if you're studying for the bar, same thing. It's like a paragraph long of data. You can't GPT that. You're not going to pass the bar that way. You actually have to have an understanding what the heck's going on and how to make the right decisions. So as you get more and more advanced in your career and you're being evaluated differently, those critical thinking skills you don't have them, you don't get it. And that makes me optimistic. In terms of AI, if you don't know what a good paper looks like or what a thesis looks like, you don't even know if the AI is giving you garbage or not. And you can't even make it do the most powerful things unless you know how to write the prompt that will make it do it. But wait a minute, if you know how to write that prompt, you know what to do.
Yeah, you don't need it.
Right. then AI is just a tool. So I would say AI is it's as good as its user. If you're lazy and you don't know what the heck's going on, it will give you garbage. But if you know what's going on and you've done your work, it's an amazing tool to save yourself time.
And going back to truth, just to hit on this, how in this time do you believe, especially in this AI world as we're getting ready to dive into, as we dove into it,
yeah.
I'm saying as it's coming now, how do we discern truth and falsehood? Other than fact checking.
That's a deep one. I would say, I'll be a little bit fuzzy about this. I think there are truths. But I think each person also has a truth. I think there are certain things that are wrong and right and that make sense to us. But I think actually, to answer your question, it comes back to critical thinking skills. I think the danger is when we try to rely on others to just tell us what to believe and to play certain social games to get the hierarchy or whatever. That's where we get in trouble and we forget all those truths. So I think you have to balance between things that you know are right or wrong with the ability to consciously be ethical and to consciously say, I'm being told this thing. Could it be right? Could it be wrong? How do I see it from a different point of view? And your willingness to engage in that will get you closer to what truth is. When we look at human history or even in our own lives, people do atrocious things to other human beings. It's because people shut off that thinking in their heads, right? It's how many times have we been in schools where kids do cruel things to each other because they're told that's the cheerleader, she's awesome, that guy's tall, he's awesome, screw the short guy or screw this person. It's because they're not thinking. Right? There's no critical thought. They're just playing roles, which is again why colleges weed out for that kind of behavior. So I think the way you find truth is not by blindly listening to anyone. It's by remembering, like, if your parents tell you something, process it, make sense of it, check your understanding, and then make a decision. Same with teachers. And that's the kind of critical thinking that I think anyone who's in a position of power is looking for in people. Because those are the people who will tell us, okay, there's a stock market crash coming. If you look at things like Hurricane Katrina, which in my old neighborhood, the problem was there were truths, but people in power didn't care, or they were just like, oh, we'll just write it out, and they're not seeing the evidence in front of them. Stock market crash. It was like there were people who knew the real estate market was garbage, and that the so-called investment banks were asleep at the wheel, and they made billions of dollars for it. So I think this is becoming a more public knowledge thing. So I think the way to know truth is to have the modesty and the courage to challenge what you're hearing, and take I would say the moral responsibility to check what you're hearing, make sure it makes sense, and not just get along because someone's popular or someone has a great authority or a brand name, or because ChatGPT 4.5 says or your teacher says it.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you just said and adding to it is surround yourself around truth.
Yeah.
Like, really surround yourself around truth. And you have to personally get comfortable with the truth.
That's a good one.
Right.
That can lead to tears.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to go home, and actually, that's why, I mean, I can dive into it a lot, but not too much today for this episode, is it really starts at home.
Yep.
Like, you should really be hearing truth at home. Home is what we call, like you said, a game. It's preparation for the game. Like, we're getting ready for the game, so it's practice. So at home, you should be having to deal with the truth. If you're telling your kids no about something, no, you didn't do that, and they keep on saying, oh, I did that, no, I'm looking at, no, you didn't clean your room, like, them being able to handle the truth, like, are you even as an adult being able to handle the truth? Hey, you know what? You have a problem always wanting to be right.
Amen.
Like you got to get comfortable with telling the truth. And I feel what happens with this falsehood, whether we love truth or we're going to falsehood, is that sometimes in this community, in this world, we're having an issue with truth. And it starts at home. And if it doesn't get rectified at home and straightened out at home, now we're creating individuals who are blind to the truth.
Yeah.
And because it's what we feed ourselves. We could even know, it's the craziest thing. I've been with individuals as well, and can be a victim of it myself too. Our honesty is where you already know it's true, but want to fight it. Like you said, the ego. We have to be careful of our ego. Like, really, I won't say literally die, but completely humble yourself to the truth. Because if you humble yourself to the truth will bless you. As we just talked about in some different situations, but you got to be willing to hear the truth, and it starts at home.
Oh, I love that. I call myself the killer of narratives. And yeah, that truth part is super important, right? Because sometimes, I think the challenges my parents had was that they weren't adapting to the truth in front of them. Mm-hmm. So they were thinking, and they didn't, again, it's not entirely their fault. They were not realizing, I'm in a school that requires a degree of sophistication about what school, like, you could not survive doing flashcards at night. You gotta, like, know what's going on in a different context. And sometimes I have to discipline parents, not sometimes, I often discipline parents. And I say that when I say discipline, I mean, like, hey, I know you think that is the way things are in your country or your culture, I'm talking people in the United States, regardless of race. Yeah. But understand that this question here it has nothing to do with what you think your child should say. Or, you think your child has to do physics. Why? Where does that come from? And they'll just say, well, some version of social programming. And I'm like, but pay attention, like, look at the guidelines. Right? So parents really need to get this now, right? Especially if you want your child to do something new and risk-taking, the kind of things that could get them a full ride to a major university. You have to make sure you're staying out of their way when those kids are presenting information to you that doesn't fit with how you were raised or your assumptions about what colleges want to hear. That's a big one, right? It's like, that's why I say, like, college admissions officers say this a lot. They say, we can tell when it's the parent speaking. We don't want to hear the parent. And it will show up in certain phrases. It will show up when the kid says, I can't say anything negative. I'm like, where did you get that from? Well, my mom said that I'm going to talk to her. Because I think sometimes, especially parents who come from like inner city neighborhoods or kind of, they have a way of survival, but they're trying to put their kid to get out of it. So sometimes that's me jumping in and saying, sometimes it's the parent needs to listen to the kid who's actually on it. And so I would say, as with parenting, I'm not a parent, but like, I guess I'm functioning one now with like 10 kids a year. It's, you do set what's right and wrong, but if you really want to do what's in your child's best interest, have the modesty to know that there may be things you don't know. And your kid may be the one to tell you, right? It's like, hey, the reason I'm getting a B is because this teacher is hard as hell and no one gets an A. And a lot of parents don't want to hear it, but I'm like, no. If that's the truth, we can work with that truth. But if you're not listening because you're arrogant about it or you think you know everything, then your child's going to be running into walls that hurt because reality doesn't care about your delusion, as I like to say when I work with students.
And you mentioned something that's very critical.
Yeah.
That even leads me to my next question is surrounding yourself with people and in rooms where you're not the greatest thinker.
Correct. It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like where you're not the greatest thinker. So how do you even apply that in your own life? Who challenges you? Who uplifts you? Like,
I'm challenged every day. I look on YouTube and I listen to people like Gary Vaynerchuk or, even video games, right? Like, there are games I've never heard of. I seek this out, but I've been challenged by mentors and people I've met who say, hey, you're right in these ways, but you missed this. And then I'm like, oh, what did I miss? And then sometimes I'm right about it, sometimes I need to change what I'm doing. So I consider myself, like, I learn from everyone. And then when I know someone has an agenda or they're just being a jerk face, I'll just dismiss them. So it's being conscious about what do you think you know and why do you know it? And when you hear something that's triggering, because I know there's a whole conversation about triggers, and it really annoys me. It's like, sometimes being triggered is not a bad thing, because it's hitting things that are really deep. And I think we're in a culture where, someone's offended because it doesn't fit their narrative or their power games, and I hate that. And I think we should have a better model where it's like, if I am triggered, I ask myself why. And then I assess, are they saying something true? Or are they saying something inconvenient? And those are two different things. People say it's not true because it's inconvenient, and then they're running into a wall they can't evade, right? So that's how I check myself is, I stand by my position, but if I get evidence to the contrary, maybe this is the debater in me, if I get evidence that says I'm wrong, I'll listen to that seriously. And that's one of the reasons I was qualifying in nationals and winning tournaments and getting my kids to win it. Because I teach them, when I teach debaters, is look, you don't like that argument, and I agree with you. Or there's an argument you like that you're gonna lose the tournament if you go for it. Dump that. And that's really hard for people to do, but I think it's one of the most important lessons in life, in any kind of pursuit or success. It's, you gotta have the modesty and I would dare say the wisdom to recognize when you need to adapt around things that you think you want or that you think are true. And I think that makes you much more powerful than to be the kind of person who's like, that's how I was raised, or black men used to have 13 girlfriends. Like that, those kind of things are not only untrue and not only well accepted, but they're dangerous things that when we don't have that critical thinking, we don't have the bravery to be truthful, or we don't have the bravery to violate the way I feel. I guess the way I always put it, to sum it up, is reality is going to be reality, whether you accept it or not. And I think that is and I think we're all learning that. And I think the way I get challenged is I open myself up to, okay, we present contrary evidence. Let's hear it. Yeah.
With that being said as well, what made me think about this too is you have to be intentional.
That's
you
a great
have
word.
to be intentional in your words, because not every moment needs to have a certain amount of level of reaction.
Thank you. Yes.
Right? So it makes you be more intentional. And I feel sometimes what can happen, no matter what culture you come from, is that we may have the right intentions as an individual, but it may be the wrong moment.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have to ward off against having the right intention, but it being the wrong moment. So we say, because we have the right intention, I got it. It's the wrong moment. It's a time, just like it says in the word, and like it says in different aspects of life. It's a time for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be okay with it being a time for everything. But you have to let go of just wanting to have, you know what, that's my intention, I gotta go with it.
Yeah. Can I answer that? It can also be the wrong action.
Yeah.
That's what really gets people in trouble. You know, imagine, you're being racially profiled, right, by the police. And I've had arguments with people about this, and I'm saying, look, I studied so much about police brutality at Stanford, and I've had people of color being like, how dare you say you shouldn't run from the police or argue with the police? And I'm like, they have a gun. Yeah. I hear you. I've told my best friends, I'm like, I got people. Survive the encounter. Don't argue. Let me bring some people who have some lawyers to get you $1 million, and to get $1 million and save your life. And I think so often we confuse our desire not to be disrespected, our desire to fight for, well, it should be this way, instead of recognizing, well, how do I win this war? Right? And that shows up in college admissions. I got fired by a parent once. I will protect the guilty for a moment, because they were so sure that their kid was the most bullied person. This kid was a jerk face. He was a homophobic jackass. And I actually hated him at the end of the process. And I pushed him, and they ended up firing me. I'm like, and the kid didn't even get to a top 200 school, even though he could have, because they were so about their intentions. I intend well, but then you're missing deadlines for college applications, but then you're writing bad essays, you're not respecting your coach. And so many students and parents do that to themselves because they think, I come from a good intention, it feels right to me, but when they're facing systems and a police officer, a teacher who has control over you, sometimes, and this is hard, I've had to swallow a lot of things, it's hard to kind of pause yourself. I think like a martial artist, like you gotta pause and realize what's happening. Yes, they're wrong. How do I navigate that wrong to either punish them later or make the right decision for that person to get what I want? And that's a hard thing, but people who are successful do it all the time.
You have to be in control of the game.
Yep.
The game can't control you.
Good way to put it.
I mean, it really can. With that in mind, so my wife is a math teacher.
Oh.
Shout out to Miss Hillary Goodner's Compass Rose Harvest class. And so with that in mind, some of our students came up with some questions.
Oh, let's go for it. Okay.
So this is going to be one of our rapid fire sessions.
All right.
A student asks, what is something that you have done or thought about that makes you think out of the box?
Oof. Oh my gosh. Something I have done or have not done?
No, something you've done or thought about that made you think out of the box.
Give me a second. That's a good one. Watching anime. I started watching it, learning about it, senior in my high school year. And I started thinking, these Japanese cartoons are talking about super philosophical things I've never heard of in my life. And I thought, that made me start looking at other countries. So I'm not kidding. I watch British game shows. I have watched sports from other countries, and I'm like, that's so damn fascinating. I went to London on a grant, and I was in a pub where people just hang out, and they're watching cricket. And I'm sitting there thinking, where's the football? So every time I guess expose myself to a different culture, I'll give two answers. This is a cultural one. It's out of my box because I'm like, I did not know this existed. And then I'm like, why do they like that? And I'm like, oh, there are connections between these things. Like, British people love the trashy reality TV shows like we do. And I would say for the students in your lives, like, push yourself culturally. Meet people of different backgrounds. Like, they talk about inclusion, but this is part of it, right? Because you'll start finding that people have more in common with you, even if it looks a different shape or comes in a different flavor. That's one answer. I think the second answer is something that pushed me out of my box. I would say doing debate. Because I learned of things I had never heard of, and I didn't know that the economics existed. I didn't know about nuclear weapons. I didn't know about, media rights or things like that. So I guess I would say to students, pretty much everything. From my background, right? Like, black boys in the inner city in New Orleans don't listen to Japanese music. At least, sorry, they do now, but they didn't when I was like coming up. They wouldn't doing debate. I had to be talked into it 9 times for the debate coach. 9 times. The 9th time I conceded. And I'm thankful for him. His name is Greg Malice. He's an angel of my life. Because doing those kind of scary activities that are positive activities, that enables you to see opportunities and it's like open up new things. For example, if I had not done debate, I would have never learned about Stanford University, or that was a possibility. Because I went to the Stanford debate camp my junior year and I'm like, oh, this place exists.
I can go there one day.
Right? I can talk about what's on campus. So success means you do things that scare the heck out of you.
Oh.
Because that's how you find out opportunities. Like, people think it's just a black-white binary. And in many ways it is. But in a way that's not, because there's so much more information, so easy to get, if you push yourself out of your comfort zone to learn more and get exposed to things, even if it triggers you, you start seeing a wider range of opportunities. And that's what rich schools do for their kids, and that's why all these legacies, it's not that there's a racial distinction, although there is. It's awareness of what's possible. And the more you open yourself to different possibilities, the more you'll start finding about scholarships, the more you'll find people who will tell you kind of the inside knowledge, legal inside knowledge, to do certain things or not do certain things. And that's probably been one of the biggest things that has helped me.
You know, it's interesting you say that because me being a part of a show choir, for those who don't know what a show choir is, it's a choir that competes and we sing and we dance and stuff. And if you ever seen Glee, you may think it's Glee. It's not totally Glee. So, but point being, I had so much of a rush out of it, especially competition wise and singing wise. You network and meet a lot of great people. But it taught and built a lot of different skills that I even use still today. That were transferable. But going to your point was that a lot of different show choirs, they travel the world. They travel to different states and stuff, which allows you to expose yourself to something new. And sometimes when you encourage your children, or as a student, you step out of the box, you expose yourself to something great. You allow that opportunity to come your way. Like you said, the opportunity in Stanford came your way. It wasn't something that you sought out. It came your way. It found you.
I didn't even know it existed.
Wow.
I had no idea the university existed. And I would have never thought I could have even gotten in. I did not have anywhere near a 4.0 and nowhere near a perfect SAT. Nowhere close. It was not bad, but it was above average, but it was not even a 1400. And I think what I've noticed a lot of people is they're so afraid to break out of their own stereotypes or what people expect of them. And even when I try to help them, small time cases, they shut the door on themselves. They're like, I'm not used to that, or I don't want to leave home, or I don't want to do that because it's so foreign to me. But what they're not recognizing that is exactly, like you were asking me about scholarships, that's how you get them. Right? That's how you open that door to yourself. So I especially people of color, I encourage you all, be comfortable with being scared and being in a foreign environment that doesn't feel good. Because if you're trying to break through those walls of racism and classism and sexism, those walls exist, and when you challenge yourself and get more exposure, that's you breaking that wall.
You know, I encourage people to watch awesome musical movie, In the Heights. And a part of that story was this Latinx young lady who was experiencing racism and was just receiving so much backlash for what she was trying to do. And what she realized, instead of walking away from the school and going back into her community, was that her community was encouraging her to stay where she was placed at, because she was going to be able to build tables for other people that look like her.
Yep.
And sometimes your experience is not for you to walk away, it's for you to stay placed so you can build tables. That's what that information is so critical.
Yeah.
Even going back to who you listen to, more and more information we can give people in our community and those who are not even in our community, the more and more we become a blessing to somebody else. But we can't get so frustrated at others not inviting us to the table.
Yep.
We need to go create the table.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we need to also walk through the door and act as if we belong.
Yeah.
And not see it as something that's, because it's foreign to me, it's not really of our community. That's something like, there are students I've wanted to help and have offered free help. You look at us who I can't help because they're like, it's not my culture. And I'm like, stop. Right? Like that is, that's not racism. That is like, that critical thinking is missing, that willingness to kind of extend yourself and adapt, that often takes a lot of us out of the game.
That's true.
Yeah, like there are people I can refer to jobs that paid more than I've ever gotten paid, but I've offered them to people and they won't take them. And I'm like, this is a $175,000 job, and you're 30, take it. And they won't do it because it doesn't fit their narrative for their culture, right? And I think, if you're a child or a parent, encourage yourself to be adaptive, right? You can reject these opportunities later, but don't say no to yourself because you're the only person of color in the room. Like, I was always that person of color in the room. Like, when I took AP Calculus, I was literally the only black person in the room. And most of my classes at Stanford, I was the only black person in the room. But what I learned from my own struggle, and I guess this is a blessing from my kind of history, I learned that A, I did belong. Like, Stanford does not give charity spots. B, if you're there and you're surviving, even if you're not the best at it, you're winning not just for yourself. I think it's something saying you're winning for everyone else. And you don't know who's watching you. Wow. I have so many times I've had people say, you saved my life, man, because I wanted to quit. This is people who are not black, right? They're like, the fact that you're getting through this means that I don't have to drop out. And I didn't even know that kind of stuff, right? And I guess the third part is say yes to yourself. And the more you do that, people pick up on that, and then you don't even know if you're already being accepted. So that's a deep thing. People don't normally talk about that, but like so often we self-sabotage because we don't think we belong. And that's what we tell ourselves, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then, so they'll like, let's talk about math teaching. Like, so many students do poorly in math, not because the teacher's bad, because they've already convinced themselves they stink at math, and then they do the things they're sure they stink at. They don't do the practicing, they don't do the drills, they don't find the resources that will actually teach them in their own language. And if you're trying to go to college, they're desperately looking for those people. Desperately, they couldn't be more obvious about it. I'll be real with you, like for example, like I had a student who got suspended for smoking, and they thought they had no chance at a top 10 school. And I said to them, this actually brings on a lot of our stories, I said, well, guess what your personal essay is about? And the mom's like in horror. And I'm like, it's happened. Your child's learned a lot from it. They were screwed over by their school. And so this is a not black person. And they were like, yeah, now I understand why African Americans are so mad about the criminal justice system. I'm like, that is the kind of inside of college wants to hear. But you gotta say yes to yourself. You gotta like say, I can be worthy of this, and I will present the best version of myself, even if I don't think I belong. And very often, that's enough. So yeah.
And yes, it's healing. Yes, it's healing, and it also incorporates some forgiveness.
Yeah.
It incorporates some forgiveness.
Especially self-forgiveness.
Oh man. Definitely self-forgiveness. And I mean, you hit on this, but the other question was, how do you become? How do you become? You go back to, at a young age, like, I gotta think my way out of here. I got to figure my way out here. To having the ability to see something, or read these different books and be inspired by the different authors that you read about, or different people you saw in life, to say, man, I envisioned something greater for me. How do you become?
Great question. Well, the first part is you become without knowing what you will become. By that I mean, a mistake that people make is they think, I have to be a lawyer, I have to be this, I have to be something that is easily understood, that is popular, or that is a track that I already know. I will say the idea of me working at a major financial company, like it's on the news every day, the idea of me going to Stanford, Yale, being a debater, none of that were predicted. I thought it was literally, every step was impossible. And statistically it was. Being a debater, much less one who was successful, much less a coach who was successful. So first off, you have to be open to things that you don't think you can become. You just got, and the second part, here comes the real answer to your question. Just pick a target and aim, and just go all the way through. You can't be thinking, oh, I'm not popular at the school, no one will date me, therefore I will never date anyone. You try, you talk, you build yourself up, and then if you pick the right environment, you'll find your person. Same thing in school. It's, you know what, I'm not considered the smartest kid here, but I really, really am good at computers. I'm very, 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 like, I'm a hardcore writer. Just aim for that thing with focus, and then you'll get where you want to go. I will say this, if you think about the multi-billionaires and all that, the multi-millionaires, or the people, the business Googles on Shark Tank, all of them were told they were garbage. And they were just like, one was, I'm great at educational software that teaches kids how to read math. That's Kevin O'Leary. I actually met him in person. That's Kevin O'Leary. A woman who got divorced, who didn't know what her life was going to be like, but she's like, I know real estate. I know how to sell. That's Barbara Corcoran on Shark Tank. If I'm not gonna tell Elon, he's a little crazy, but like, if you look at any of these mega stars though, none of them did their role or played the part or were the cool kids. They were all like, you know what, I'm living in the big, like Mark Cuban, I'm eating ramen for 7 years, but I'm gonna be really good at technology and I'm gonna do it for 7 years, and now he's Mark Cuban, owns the Dallas Mavericks. So just one of the boss said to me, just sack the quarterback.
I like that.
I know, you're a football guy, so yeah. He just like, ignore everything else. Just do the one thing that's right to do, and let all the idiots try to hurt you or whatever, but if you do that one thing really, really well, and you're focused and you have good character and you have integrity, you will start finding new paths that no one's ever seen before. And that's what the college admissions process is testing for.
It made me think about the story of James Earl Jones. Constantly being picked on about his voice, and then now we celebrate his voice. Right? We try to get his voice on different apps and stuff. Wow.
Here's a fun thing. Often you are celebrated because you do the thing that made you, you do the thing that you were made fun of for. And I would encourage all the kids who are going through this to realize this. I mean, yeah, often the things that make you ultimately successful and happy are the things that you were made fun of for.
That's the gym. Let's go.
And sometimes are your family, right? Because people are frightened to death of that kind of person. Frightened. It's because you're threatening. You're actually threatening, right? Like, as I was thinking my way, I'll tell you, when I would get debate tournament awards, like from places that were all white people in those award rounds, I scared the living hell out of my opponent sometimes. Because they're like, we don't know, but you're here, and this is like, yeah, I'm like, yes, I'm here. And in some cases, I had judges who were freaking out too. Or just the fact that I was able to get into this high school, people thought I was going to leave the community and turn white or act white, or all this other nonsense sometimes we were told. But if I did not put myself in that position to be attacked, there's no Stanford giving me enough money so that I only had $6,000 in loans after 4 years. That does not happen in a world where I let the outside noise and their terrorism kind of shut me down. In fact, it's the thing I featured in my essay, or I featured in my argument that my teachers picked up on that got me through Stanford and then Yale. So I was saying, if you have something that's integrity and that matters to you and that's who you are, and people are making fun of you or people are not supporting you who should be supporting you, that is your superpower. And then we're in a world where everyone's starving for those stories, right? I'm trying to imagine, like if you think about any superhero, right? The thing that gives them their superpower is the very thing that made them vulnerable, that broke them, almost broke them. And human beings are no different.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. Now, on the fun side,
sure.
What's something you do for fun?
I'm a big foodie.
Okay.
I love good food of different cultures, and Austin's a great place for that.
I mean, you come from New Orleans,
I do come from New Orleans, yes. I was.
You get some beignets now?
There aren't that many places in Austin that do proper beignets, but there are a few. I'm a big food guy. I really like. I've watched Iron Chef, the Japanese show, the subtitles, before it became popular to do that. So that's one thing I do. I watch people who are doing competitive video gaming.
Okay.
I'm 40, so I suck. I will never compete because I'm literally too slow. But I admire people who play who can game well. One other thing I really, 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 really like, and I guess this is my career. I am an academic nerd. I watch videos on AP Cal. Part of it's my job. I have to be able to explain kids and understand what the heck's going on with that. But I do like learning and teaching, which is, by the way, Stanford's #1 criterion to get it. #1 criterion, they call it intellectual vitality.
Catch that.
It is intellectual vitality, or it's actually now the top 20 schools really care about it, but Stanford's like, you do this, everything else doesn't matter. Almost everything else doesn't matter. Intellectual curiosity about things just because you are interested in learning about it. So
it's the love for it.
Yeah, and you're doing it, and if you do it in spite of people telling you not to do it, even better. So I will watch European shows just because I'm damn curious. They call something called Eurovision, with the weirdest music on our Eurovision. And it's like a massive video music competition where they have all these 40 European countries come together with weird different styles, and they vote on who's the best of Europe. It's actually, so outside of the United States, everyone knows about this. It's their music Super Bowl. So what I do for fun is I'll check out things from other cultures. I'll go on Netflix and watch Korean sci-fi shows. This thing that I'm like, I've never thought about these things before. So all this AI stuff, it doesn't really shock my conscience because I've watched plenty of sci-fi movies that have talked about AI and how it works. So those are some wild answers.
And does that lead into, in regards to the question, is the same thing with self-care? Or do you do self-care?
Absolutely. I've studied a lot about self-care. I had to kind of overcome my own trauma and what the hell is going on. So in terms of self-care stuff, I do watch people who are really good, big thinkers like Gary Vaynerchuk. I watch some of the TED Talks that talk about this. I guess related to that, I like studying social psychology and what makes people tick, and that's probably coming out in this interview. Is like seeing things as a game. It's like, why are they saying that? So I study human psychology a lot because I'm fascinated by what makes people think the way they do and what makes them act the way they do in groups, for better or for worse.
So, just to paint the picture, as we can head to close, is one is, once again, thank you.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
As well, man. Just been having an amazing time, really. And I'm telling you, I'm not going back to who you listen to. If you get a chance, I know you'll tell us the link as well. We're gonna have it in the podcast. For the YouTube, you can go underneath the description and click on the link as well. Find the link is. Definitely get with him as well. His heart is in the right place. And you definitely can tell his mind is also in the right place too as well. With that being said, when it's been a long day going to self-care, you want to do some reflection, or you just want to get away, when you have your headphones on, what are you listening to? Who you listen to?
Good question. That answer depends on what part of my life. When I was in high school, it was like fast anime music that was like, that was very, like, they had these lyrics that were very inspirational. I think the equivalent would be people listening to the soundtrack to Hero No Academia. But we had other things back in the 90s. I think nowadays what I listen to a lot of podcasts like this one. To hear from people who are like military people who've gone through things. So that's, or sometimes I'll be a foodie and go to a restaurant I've never gone to before that I'm like, I've never had Peruvian food, but I'm freaking out. I've read 100 essays. I've dealt with some bad parents. They're not bad anymore. I choose my clients carefully, but I'll put myself in a totally new environment, and that's part of my self-care, and I'll have my headphones on. And that's so that's what I listen to. It's a combination of sometimes of video game soundtracks. And that's just, I know I'm being weird, but that's the frequency I'm on. So it'll be a combination of either music from like video games or anime to podcasts to listening to someone's story who's been through a really interesting life. And I'm like, I didn't think about things that way. And I think if you're thinking I'm really smart, honestly, it's just work. It's just thousands and thousands of hours of listening to things I've never heard of. That gave me the vocabulary I have. So I guess to the children, students and adults out there, like people like to talk about intelligence. It's something you build. It's not what you're born with, right? It's exposing yourself to new ideas and playing with them in your head and then learning vocabularies. That's what makes you really, sharp. It's not what you're born with. So I would say it's one of my closing salvos. It's like, I believe that every student can do what they want to do. It's just, are you willing to take that risk? Are you willing to kind of put in those hours to learn to be uncomfortable with new ideas or new cultures? And I think that's what makes you intelligent. I'll tell you, I took the Mensa test. I actually did end up getting into Mensa. That was like 6 months ago. And I did not think I would have passed that test. But part of the test is actually a test of what I'm talking about. They will test for like, do you recognize these people? Do you recognize this pattern? Do you do these problems? Do you know these vocabulary terms? It's actually a test of exposure and processing speed. It's not God-given ability. It's how do you learn vocabulary? You read a lot and you write a lot and you open yourself up to the things we're talking about. How do you know how to answer the question about identify these people and who they are? It's the same process. How do you do all those math questions? It's learn math in a way so that you can figure out why it matters and how it works in a consistent pattern. So it's all doable. But unfortunately, our schools and our social systems tell us certain people are smart, certain people are dumb, certain people are attractive, certain people are not. And I think the beautiful part in 2023 is that that's all getting blown up. It's open field for almost anyone. So
it goes along with this saying I used to say, and not to regurgitate the whole saying, but towards the B clause, the end of the saying, it says, by all means, just believe.
That's a good way to put it. Yep.
Just believe that it's possible. Explore.
And do.
Like you saying, and live, learn, and grow each day. Live, learn, and grow each day. Can you tell us the link where we want to find your link?
Yes. So I'll give you 3 ways to contact me. One is my website, which I'm updating. It's called www.elitecollegehacker.com. It's spelled the way it sounds. I'm also, it's probably the best way to get in touch with me is on LinkedIn. So if you Google Anthony Berryhill, you'll see me in a tie. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me as well. And my email is anthony@elitecollegehacker.com. I encourage anyone listening to this to reach out to me, ask me questions you have. I'll have those conversations, whether or not it's a formal coaching environment or not. That's part of my life mission. My motto is like making elite college education accessible to all. And I think one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, and you've been great. You're a great resource for people here. Is there are lots of people like me. I'm happy to point you to them as appropriate, but there are resources. So please ask. Please reach out for help. If you don't know something like how do I get into college, how do I pay for college? We're in a world now that wasn't true when I was applying in 1999, where there's so many people who've invested those resources if you're willing to look for them, even if it scares you. So, but through those 3 methods, reach out to me, and we'll have those conversations, be it formally or informally, or if you just need someone to kind of point you in the right direction.
Man, once again, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Again. And make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to this podcast. It's Who You Listening To with Markey B. And it's been another great episode. And I don't know about you, but I'm about to watch this over and over again just to keep on catching the gems of these episodes. And thank you for everybody who came on, as well as Mr. Berryhill today. So come back to listen to another podcast with Who You Listening To with Markey B. All right, we're out.